This time on Poll Hub, something new from the Marist Poll. We call it the America Now Index, and we'll explain what we hope it can show month after month. It's different from our regular polls. Then you don't have enough, fill in the blank, Republican, Democrat, Reform Party members in your poll. Every political pollster hears the same thing all the time. But here's the thing. The number of people saying they're in any given party changes all the time. And the trend can give us some interesting insights into the electorate. And that is just what we got when we dug into our polls. And we're going to share those interesting insights with you. So let's go. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion, now relegated to my third place in intros, having been promoted only last episode.
Well, if we could get a fourth host, then we'd put you in fourth. But, let's call it a day for now. We talked about a month ago about a new thing that we'd released called the Marist Poll America Now Index. And at the time, it was the very beginning, and we expect to be doing this every month. So this is now the first month where we have all the elements of the index together. So we're talking about community, we're talking about society, which we'll explain in a minute. We're talking about the economy, we're talking about health. And we're asking a series of questions in each of those areas to capture what Americans are thinking about, where we're going, where we've been, kind of a moment in time of how do they feel about the country in these different ways. The index has a number, so we're from 0 to 10 when we ask the questions, and you guys will explain in a minute what that means. But right now, the index kind of sits in the middle, in the what we call the yellow area. What does that say about where we are as a country right now, Lee, for instance, and what are you looking for as we do this in July and August and September? What are you looking for when you look at this?
Well, I think there's several things, and I think that one of the things we're looking for is primarily trend. That's a big thing an index can provide us. So month by month by month, we're going to see how Americans have, what their outlook is about the nation overall, but then we're going to also be able to look at the component parts, the economy, healthcare, community, and the government society one that you noted, the two last ones being the ones we've just added to make a complete measurement of this. So trend's a big deal. And then, of course, within each of these components, the fact that our overall is in the yellow, as you indicate, 6.3, as is the economy, health, and society. People, interestingly, have a 7.5 score on a 0 to 10 about the community, and they feel stronger where they live. And then I was also looking at, and I can get into this subsequently, I think we have a new partner on the
that's
that
the fourth person, so you'll be relegated.
That's Rosie. That's Rosie.
Always wants to get into the act. Yes, definitely. But I also am taking a look at high numbers, low numbers. The high number in the national index, where the 6.3 is the average, is 7.3, and that is held by Republicans. The lowest in the overall outlook are African Americans at 5.8, and people under $50,000 in income also at 5.8. So I thought that kind of conformed to what the expectations might be, and there is quite a wide gap. So not only are we looking at trends down the road, but we're looking at the numbers themselves and seeing the gaps and the like.
So last month we started off with two aspects and two elements of the index. We started off with the economic index and a health index, and I think what makes this a little different than some of the other measures that we see over time is that we're really focusing on how people feel, what their perceptions are. So it's not so much about the economy, but it's how are you doing? How are you doing financially? How's your household doing? Are jobs plentiful or scarce in your area? And so, you were talking about Trendly, and at least on the economy and on health, I think we did see a little bit of a bump up from May. Granted, not a lot to write home about. People especially concerned about the issue of jobs. And I think actually of the 16 items that we asked people to weigh in on all of these different factors, the fact that jobs are not easy to find scored the lowest of all of those items
And
across the board.
I might add, Barb, that among Democrats at 3.2 and African Americans at 3.4, those were the two lowest group within the jobs score, which, as you indicated, was the lowest.
Yeah, but overall, we saw a little tiny kind of nudge, at least over the the 50-yard line, for how people are feeling about the economy. So hopefully, that's a trend that will continue. But we don't know. I mean, there are a lot of places that have had to do an about face on opening up because of COVID. So we will be tracking that as well. And then healthcare, people's health, and generally, people do describe their health, that they are satisfied with it, and they do have, most people feel comfortable with their access to healthcare. But again, the one sticking point in that area is that many people do feel that there is a significant risk to their health at this time. Not surprisingly, in the midst of a pandemic. But at that, again, that's something that draws that measure down. We added two others too this time, as you alluded to, Jay. One was community, which we wanted to know about how people feel about the places where they live. So not necessarily all the communities they belong to, a work community or a religious community, but specifically where they kind of hang their hat at the end of the day. And what was interesting is we found that Americans are generally comfortable with life in their local communities and feel safe where they live. And safety actually receives the highest score of the 16 items that we measured. Which in other summers past, I suspect we may not have found that kind of satisfaction. And then finally, we also take a look now at what is society and government, and that's probably again, that was at 5.6 overall, just over that 5, which we kind of look at as really a midpoint that's not so good, but maybe not so bad.
A cautionary number.
Yes.
It's a cautionary number.
But again, not surprisingly, most Americans believe their leaders are out of touch, with what they need. And one of the questions that we asked is whether they feel they live in a fair and a just society. And although we saw a very significant racial divide which existed on that question, overall it was also it was low. So a lot of concern, dissatisfaction, kind of discomfort. And so not surprising that when we look at kind of some of the daily polls where people are talking about the direction of the country, that we've seen that hit all-time lows.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing. You talked about community. That is the one at 7.5 that is in the green. So that's a more positive score overall. The lowest within that had to do with the people who live in big cities, who were at 7.1. Not a decent number, but the bottom within that attribute, that category. The highest overall of all the 16, we talked about jobs and being at the low point. The highest overall was in this category. It was people who live in rural areas. They think that where they live is the best, and that was a 9.0. So what we see is the numbers vary tremendously here from way down all the way up to 9.0. So people are reacting very differently to their own experiences, and it's not just, as you say, about the perceptions people have.
Although there were few and nines were few and far between on most of these topics.
Yeah,
Yeah, they probably were looking at my college transcripts or something.
and just to explain, from 0 to 3, we're calling the red area, and from over 3 up to 7, we're calling the yellow area, and from 7, 8, 9 up to 10 is the green. It's so the colors are something that are somewhat arbitrary, but we thought it would be helpful to at least create a visual sense of where we are. So with a minute left before we go to the next segment, what does it mean that we're at 6.3 to you guys? What is that? What does a 6.3 mean? Because if that's a 6.3 on a scale of 0 to 10, and you're grading it, if you're in class, that's not so good. Right, at 63 on a test out of 100,
not even what we used to call a gentleman's C.
Right.
Well, I think it's a cautionary note. It's neither positive nor negative particularly. It's slightly to the positive side, and that's being pulled by people's sense of community. But I think it reflects an insecurity. It reflects the uncertainty of the times. And as I say, it's a cautionary time.
And also
people are hesitant.
And also, as statisticians, we tend to look, okay, so what does this average mean? Does it mean that we have a consensus that, everybody sort of feels, blech? I know that's not a technical term, but, everybody's sort of feeling the same way? Or is there significant dispersion? In other words, we're seeing people's worldview very different. And I think when it comes to issues of looking at people at different income levels, we look at race, we see a lot of differences among Americans. And as Lee pointed out, we see that difference too in community, where people who live in rural areas, rate the area where they live much higher than people who live in areas that are much more concentrated and much more populated.
Yeah, and before we go to It's a Party, which I can't wait to see what we talk about.
I already told everybody in the open.
I know. But I obviously was listening to it. But, if people want to hopefully find out more about the index, hopefully we piqued your interest in kind of jumping into the numbers and looking about where might one find this information, he asked.
We'll put it in the show notes, but if you go to our website, there's a link right off the top post right now into a page, and then also into the results themselves. But we'll put everything into the show notes so you can find it easily and track it. And remember, we're doing it every month.
So yes, party. Although
not what you
I don't know. Although I don't think pollsters are exactly those wild and crazy people that we have known and loved, but this is an issue that is near and dear to our hearts, especially as we get into election season, where whether people are Democrats or Republicans or identify themselves as independents can make a difference in what people are seeing in the results of those polls. So Lee, do you want to jump in? And I know we've talked about this before, but just talk about exactly what we mean by party identification and why all the hysteria.
Well, because there's so much hysteria, let's go back to the basics here. The country does not have a national party registration. We know a lot from the census about the country. We don't know the exact number of Democrats and Republicans in the country, or independents for that matter, because people don't register throughout the country in different states by party. So we don't have that measure.
Some places do,
some do,
but a lot
some
don't.
do, but a lot don't. So therefore, there is no national number. So when you see party in any kind of poll, it is the party identification, the affinity people have, the allegiance to a particular political party, who they identify with.
And that comes because we asked them, what party
and
are
we
you?
asked them that, self-reported.
Well, we asked what you consider yourself. So
Right.
we're not asking if they're registered in a party.
No.
We're not asking about their enrollment, because not everybody can.
There's tons of Democrats registered in the South who haven't voted for a Democrat except for maybe their local county sheriff in 40 years. So, yeah.
So one of the reasons, and what gets into this, so the people who like to kind of like hack at polls like to look immediately, if you can find it, and not all polls provide this transparency, what is the party of that particular survey. So
Well,
how
but
many
that's a good
Democrats do they
thing.
have?
That's
How
a
many
good thing.
Republicans?
That's a good
Good
thing,
to
though,
check.
too, Lee, because it does give you perspective about the poll.
Yeah, so you want to know if the information is provided, how many Democrats, how many Republicans were in that particular survey, in that sample. And that, given the polarization that exists in the country, it's a big deal what kind of gap you have. Now, Jay, I know you look at a lot of social media, and I know Mary, our executive producer, sends a lot of stuff our way, but a very common criticism of polls in social media, I know, is one of your favorites.
Right. Well, so in fact, we talked about it 3 weeks ago when Donald Trump's pollster, John McLaughlin, put out a memo to the president and said, hey, these polls, they don't have enough Republicans in them. And that's why you're doing so badly in the polls, which was absurd on its face because it's not, nobody's putting Republicans or Democrats in the poll or asking questions. So we thought, why don't we go back and look? We've done national polling for decades, but we go back to, say, 2008. Right before the election of Barack Obama, and look over the last 12 years. We ask, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? What party do you identify? We don't ask the name of the party, but people identify as Republican or Democrat or Independent. We then go further and say, well, if you lean towards a party, where do you lean? So we get the leaners as well. So the independent number comes down. In big national, like Gallup does a poll, Pew does a poll where they actually, look at Republicans and Democrats across the country, and independents are in some cases the largest party, right? It is 40% or more identify as independents. So when we did that, we went back and looked, and one of the things that really leapt out was that during the presidency of Donald Trump, if you look at the people who just identify as Republicans, this is before you ask them, before you ask the independents, well, if you had to pick a side, which side would you pick? In which case, many independents will pick Republican or Democrat. In this case, this is before that. This is, I am a Republican, I'm proud to be a Republican, I am a Republican. And then I am a Democrat, I'm proud to be a Democrat. During the Trump presidency, the people who self-identify as Republicans before they're asked to lean, if they say they're not, has decreased. And the number of Democrats has slightly crept up. But the number of independents, the people who say they're independent on that first question, they have increased. And it seems to back up what many people have said, which is that Donald Trump seems to be doing damage to the Republican brand. And there are fewer people who are willing to identify on, at least at first blush, as Republican. That being said, Lee, we then did the Democrats plus the leaners and the Republicans plus the leaners, which left just this tiny sliver of people who swear they are independents. And those numbers haven't really changed.
Yeah, and what I think is very important to point out is, people very often see, well, there's a lot of things to point out that are important, but one of the things is people
Just
often
try
see.
one, Lee.
Just try one at a time.
Just try one at a time, okay?
People say, oh, independents are surging in this country. Well, if you say people who lean one way to the Democrats or lean the other way to the Republicans, you're only left with about 10 or 12% of the people who might be called pure independents. So that's, the idea that the independents are the largest group in the nation, well, they're not exactly right, straight independents. They tip one way or the other. The other point I want to make is, and if we talk about party identification as being a variable, not a demographic, not a parameter where you can go look up what the national numbers are, then it also means you can't weight by party. You can't adjust the sample as you might in other areas to make it more in line with what we know to be gender or race in the country. Here you can't do that because there is no number to weight the data to. And I want to make one other point, and I'm going to get out of this.
But before you,
No.
Before you move on to the weighting issue, a
Yeah.
lot of pollsters do weight by party, and they simply weight to the past election. So why not? In other words, they go back to the exit polls and they say, okay, so there were 3 percentage points more Republicans during this election, or there were 6 percentage point more Democrats in another election.
So therefore you have too many or not enough.
Well, but why can't you just use a previous election exit poll?
Because as you would say, to quote the inimitable Barbara Carvalho here, the future is not as we remember.
You mean the inimitable Casey Stengel or Yogi Berra? We've actually had some dispute as to who actually has said that. So
yeah,
I'll
we actually have. And John Sparks, our friend of all of us, is is a relative of Casey Stengel, and I think he said it was Yogi Berra. So I think that
I know.
yeah, but I thought that was some disloyalty on his part, and I don't know what that means. But clearly,
so we're going to have to look it up.
you're going to have to look it up. So there is no. If you rely on the past election, if you fight the last war in terms of party spread, you're asking for trouble. So what you do is, in fact, as Jay started out the discussion, well, there seems to be some Republican brand damage right now. So perhaps if you find a little wider gap in some of the national polls, that may be the reason. However, sometimes turnout gets into this and enthusiasm plays a factor, and you can overcome a damaged brand if you can get your folks to show up on election day or election week, as we may have this year.
Jay,
so there's a lot to say about parties.
Jay, just quickly, you said you went back to 2008. Did you see any differences during the Obama administration in terms of party? In other words, kind of the opposite effect, where Republican identification was surging and Democrat not?
Yeah, there's actually two other points, and they weren't the general elections. They're the midterms. They're the 2010 midterm and the 2018 midterm. And if you think about it, those were more polarizing elections than the general elections of 2016, despite what we think about 2016, 2012, or 2008. That 2010 election, that was the Tea Party revolt, and 2018 was the big, big blue wave. In both of those cases, you saw realignment showing up a few months before, as our polls indicated, by people's self-identification. So the Republican brand started dipping in 2018 across most of 2018 with the people who said, I'm a Republican first and no more. And the Democratic brand dropped pretty furiously during 2009, late 2009 into early 2010. Same idea. People were saying, I'm an independent, even if they tended to be a Democrat. And then in 2018, they said, I'm a independent, even though they tended to be a Republican because they didn't want to self-identify.
Really interesting.
I think we've discussed everything about party except having Leslie Gore make a comment about it.
Oh, dearly. My
Anybody?
goodness.
Anybody?
It's my
I'm not going
party,
for
and
it.
I'll cry if I
Cry
want.
if I want to.
Cry if I want
Yeah,
to.
but I bet Amelia didn't get that one. So on that
I have
note,
no idea what you're talking about. I just guessed. I didn't know that. I
guys,
don't even know what that is.
that's
there's
going to
also
do
a
it.
book by
That Al
hold on a
Gore's
second,
mom or
Bob.
something?
Hold on a second, Bob. There was also a book by the great political journalist David Broder, taking a page out of the old song, and he called it "The Party's Over," which was
Please
an older
don't sing
song.
it. Please
Not
do
going
not
there.
sing it.
That was Jason.
Quick, head to the close.
Anyway, that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Marist College is still in Poughkeepsie, New York, but we are not. We are scattered. We are scattered around in a number of different places, practicing social distancing. Thank you, Mary Griffith, our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our editor. Thanks to her, you will get this all cleaned up. And always Amelia Morell, our production assistant, who does an awful lot of research to make us sound smart.
And needs to report on her dog Hudson's weight this week. Amelia, what you got?
He is 30 pounds now.
This is a different index. This is the Hudson Index.
The Hudson Index. Yes, the Hudson Canine Index. We want to thank those of you who did special research on this, and it wasn't Hudson, but I think Amelia was crunching numbers on this one, but also from our own polls, but also the Roper Center, which has provided us some look at some other polls like Pew and Gallup and others on this topic, and we can look back at survey questions over time, over the decades, because lots of people have been polling lots of things, and great to find out from the Roper Center what they've shown.
If you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll, Facebook, and Instagram. Also, a lot of what we talked about is covered in the Academy. We've talked about the Academy a lot. You go to our website, there's a tab up there that says Academy. You can find out a whole lot more about Party ID there, more than maybe you even want to know, but it would be interesting. Check it out. All of the information we gave you today about the index and everything else will be down in the show notes. And if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review of this show on your podcasting app of choice, whatever you're listening to us on. Positive reviews help other people find us. So spread the love and let people know what you think about us. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. And in the meantime, stay safe. Things are opening up, but they're also closing back down in various places. So stay safe, and we'll see you back here next week.